Hello and thanks for coming to my talk. I'm going to start my talk at way back in the human history when we used to tell stories about various things. We passed these stories down over generations and it probably helped us survive as a species. And oral storytelling was one of the oldest forms of storytelling, and with mobile revolution it has taken a powerful position in our society. And most of us now have smartphones with us, and we almost always have them with us because there's an app for everything that we want to do. And the good thing about it is that digital storytelling can reach anyone at any time because of the mobile phones. And we can use that to our advantage in science communication and education efforts. Audio storytelling, which includes podcast and radio, has a unique benefit in this regard, because you can be multitasking while listening to a podcast. For example, most people listen to podcasts when they're driving or cooking or when they're working out. With all these podcast apps with us in our mobile phones, audio storytelling is having a moment again. But given how useful and prevalent audio storytelling is, we can actually use that in undergraduate education. And in fact, a study has shown that podcasting can promote deep learning in students, which means that the students were able to understand the concepts better using podcasting technique, and they were also able to retain the concepts better. But unfortunately, we rarely teach science communication to most undergraduate students, and we certainly don't teach them the basics of audio storytelling. And that is why we incorporated that in our biology undergraduate class at Florida International University, where the students had to pick a paper from the Journal of Animal Ecology. And so we taught them how to read the paper. And once they read the paper, they had to communicate what they read to the lay audience using two projects. So the first project was Annotation project, where the students had to break the paper apart into different components and explain and add information or annotations to the paper so that the lay person who is reading the paper can use those annotations to understand the paper. And the second part to the project was a podcast. So the students had to use what they've learned from the paper and communicate that information to the lay audience in the form of a podcast. And so they had to script it and they had to narrate it as a podcast. And so we wanted to understand whether this process of going through all these three steps actually helps them understand the research paper better. And so we did this with around 50 biology undergraduate students at Florida International University. Most of them were from sophomore to senior level, and at FIU. And FIU is primarily a minority-serving university with over 41,000 undergraduate students, and most of them are Hispanic or African American, and over 57% of them are women. And before this assignment or the project, none of the students had any experience in science communication through audio before, and most of them did not have any habit of listening to science podcasts. So we started the project with the annotations, and so annotation is basically, it is to help readers interpret complex science by overlaying additional information on a research paper. And so this annotation, this information that we add can be vocabulary, it can be something about the methods, or the descriptions of the prior research and the explanations of major conclusions, or the inferences of the paper, or it could be identifying the research questions in the paper, or the hypothesis in the paper, or the daily life impact of the research that they've read. And so we use this annotation process as a way to ensure that the students really understood what the research was in the paper, and so which is really important for them to be able to use that to script a podcast in the next level. So we gave some examples of annotations to the students, and we taught them how to annotate a paper. And here you can see some examples of the annotation. So they've highlighted a glossary and explained what it means. They've also highlighted the news and policy links of the statements that are there in the paper, and similarly connections to learning standards, and so on. And so again, like I mentioned, the students had to choose a paper from the Journal of Animal Ecology, and they learned how to annotate the paper, and then they read the paper accordingly and annotated the paper. So once the students actually annotated the paper, they had to write a podcast script. And again, for this, we gave them examples of some of the most famous podcasts that are available, which includes Radiolab and 60-Second Science. And we also gave them an example of a podcast script that we wrote, and we annotated each of the line or color-coded each of the line in the script to kind of show them what how it actually tells a story in the form of a podcast. So basically explaining which one of them is talking about, which of the sentences is talking about the importance, and where do we talk about the methods in the podcast, and so on. And so we also had a short presentation in the class to explain how to communicate ideas effectively in a podcast format. And so some of the tips included that they had to start the script with a hook. A hook is typically the paper's real-world connection, and so it can be a sound of an animal or the real-life connection of the paper. And they also were instructed not to include any technical details of the methods, and they had to keep the script concise with no jargon. And if they wish to use the jargon, they had to explain the terms so that they're not completely dumbing it down, but they're still explaining things in the podcast. And they had to end the podcast with a punchline. And so again, we wanted to understand if this helps them understand the research paper better. So I actually went through each of these scripts and we edited it at least twice with the students. And so here you can see one of the final scripts, and it's color-coded as well to show different parts of the story. And so from there, we actually did a table read with the students in each group. So this is basically narrating the whole script in the form of a podcast. And this was actually one of the most fun parts of the podcast, because we all make mistakes and not everybody can be David Attenborough when narrating something, right? And so once we practiced this narration, we actually recorded this using a free software. Free recording software. You can actually find free software for both iPhone and Android. And I eventually edited these podcasts on GarageBand, which is again a free software. And there are free softwares like Audacity that you can use as well, Audacity. So that is to say that you don't actually need any fancy equipment to do this kind of assignment. And so the outcome of all of this is 12 episodes of 2 to 5 minutes each. And so we call this series of podcasts as audio abstracts. And these audio abstracts have been uploaded on the SoundCloud account of the British Ecological Society journals. And these are free to access to anyone. And the stories are written they're communicated for both scientists and lay audience, which is really a good job on the undergraduates' part. And so all of these podcasts together have been played over 3,000 times, which is something that is really impressive, because it has a direct impact on the audience immediately. And even my papers sometimes don't get those many downloads. So this is really a big thing for the undergrads. And because at that time I was actually a multimedia editor for the Journal of Animal Ecology's blog, which is Journal Animal Ecology in Focus.com, I also blogged about this whole project, and so that actually brought in a few more audience to the podcast, a lot of ecologists that were interested in learning about these podcasts. And so if you haven't actually checked out this blog, please do check out Animal Ecology in Focus.com. And so here is an example of one of the podcasts that we made. And here you can see the title of the paper that the students actually annotated and wrote a podcast on. And they were asked to give a title for their podcast. And this is what they call their podcast. And I'll let you listen.
Welcome to Audio Abstracts.
Bumblebees are truly just unbelievable in their ability to adapt. Due to urbanization and decreasing natural habitats, ecological conditions for animals such as insects are different, and that can affect their functional traits.
Since this is an ongoing and continuous problem, it is important to understand how animals such as bumblebees respond to urbanization. Specifically, how do urban and rural bumblebee populations differ in functional traits such as body size, mobility as reflected in wing size, and resource acquisition as reflected in their tongue length?
To answer this, researchers observed 2 species of bumblebees in rural and urban areas in Switzerland and measured various traits including body size, wing size, and tongue length.
They observed that urban bumblebees are not only smaller than rural bees, but also had more variation in other traits compared to rural species. The smaller size not only helps to adapt to the tight living spaces, but also to the changes in weather. In urban areas, the weather is slightly hotter than in rural ones. Knowing that, it makes sense as to why this change would cause the variation in their morphological traits. Because cities are more heterogeneous than rural areas, the high variability in traits can be adaptive in urban areas.
Urban bees are the bee's knees and are a really great example of how animals adapt in human environments. The study is titled Urban Bumblebees Are Smaller and More Phenotypically Diverse Than the Rural Counterparts, and you can read it in the Journal of Animal Ecology website. This podcast is scripted by the following undergraduate students at Florida International University:
Hannah Bruce Opris,
Joseph Tolentino, Diana Orozco,
Cindy Lamont Sanchez.
Alyssa Rodriguez.
Thank you for listening.
So that was just one of the 12 podcasts, and you can listen to the other podcasts in the SoundCloud account of British Ecological Journals, and the link is above. All right, so we wanted to actually assess the impact of this whole process, or the whole project, and so we gave them an optional survey asking various questions about the experience. And so we particularly wanted to understand if the students felt like it was an exciting and interesting project for them, and if they felt like the outcomes actually reflected their authentic contributions. And so we asked them to answer a score from the scale of 1 to 6, with 6 being strongly agree to a point. And so we did this for both podcast and annotation activity. And the average scores are shown here in the bar plot. So the students actually thought that both the activities were important to the scientific community, and both of them were interesting, and they felt responsible for both of the activities. And they had faced some challenges which they again managed to overcome during this process. And they also thought it was important for them, and it was an exciting thing. And most importantly, both podcast and annotation activities gave them a sense of personal achievement, which is really good experience for an undergraduate. And so we also asked them to give some short form answers to some of the questions. So when we asked them what was the annotation part of the project helpful, and most of them said it was helpful. It really helped them understand the paper better, because they had to help. So they had to break the paper down into manageable parts so they could easily understand it. And so when asked, was the podcast portion useful, most of them said yes, it was really useful and interesting. It helped them in understanding the paper better. And they also said it really brought the annotations into life, and it also helped them communicate their ideas better. And when asked what part of the project surprised them, obviously most of them said the podcast part and the recording part was one of the most surprising part, because most of them thought it would be difficult, but it wasn't as difficult as they expected. And also they had never done any science communication or any podcast before, so for them it was really surprising for them to do this project. And when asked what was their favorite part of the project most of them said it was recording the podcast, because it's always fun interacting with the other students when you're recording, and you make all these mistakes and you laugh at each other, but at the same time you're trying to explain what you learned to other people, And so they had like a strong sense of achievement, even though the process of recording itself was tedious because they had to go through a few edits of their script and so on. And they also thought annotating was also one of the useful parts because it made it easier to read the paper. And then asked, how do you feel about your podcast being available for other students to listen to? Most students said they felt really good that the scientific community can actually listen to these podcasts. And they also felt that these podcasts would be beneficial for other students, not only from in biology, but also students from other disciplines would be able to understand these podcasts better even before reading the actual paper. And so they thought it was a good opportunity to communicate what they've learned, and they felt, more importantly, they felt closer to the scientific community because they felt like this was being heard by the scientists and other people in the field. And they felt really proud of this assignment, and that it added to their university experience. All of these are really, really good examples of how students felt like throughout the process, even though they may have to go through some of the tedious process of editing editing the scripts and so on. It was definitely a good learning experience, at least from the feedback that we got from the students. So in conclusion, we suggest that undergraduate learning experience can be enhanced by activities that involve communicating what they learned in the class or what they learned from reading a research paper through activities such as annotating or podcasting about the paper. So with that, I thank you for watching. You can listen to the rest of the audio abstracts in the link displayed there. And if you want, you can also visit animalecologyinfocus.com to learn more about audio abstracts. And you can also visit scienceintheclassroom.org to learn more about the annotation project. And so in that website, you can actually volunteer to annotate more papers. So other people can actually understand your paper or others' papers that you've annotated, which is really fantastic. And I also thank Ale and Tommy for letting us do this in their classrooms, and the symposium organizers, Carly and David, for this opportunity. And with the pandemic and the virtual classrooms, I'm sure a lot of undergraduate courses can actually benefit from this kind of project. So if you're looking to actually replicate this, if you're looking to do this for one of your undergraduate classes, please contact us. We'll give you all the resources that we have, and we'll tell you how to do it, and we can help you out with carrying this out for your students. Thank you so much.